Chapter 15, Section 3, Florida. In this section, you will learn about how the United States acquired Florida.
Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became a prince of a town called Bel Air. In Westmoreland, Virginia, born and raised. On the plantation is where I kept most of my slaves. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool until Lieutenant Region 9 made me look like a fool. The embargo act was up to no good, and the war it had of made us all was misunderstood. We got into some debt, and the nation got scared, but let's just settle, we were unprepared. A Missouri compromise was put into place, prohibiting slavery into the main state. 1820 allowed slavery into Missouri, but not into the Northwest Territory. Then I created the Monroe Doctrine. If countries attacked, then the rest was a sin. The Adams-Onis Treaty with us and Spain, we acquired Florida, a new game. Settling a boundary between U.S. and Spain, the Spanish power was no longer a pain. There was a little dispute between McCulloch and Maryland, in which Maryland believed they had the upper hand. Arguing over Maryland, taxing a bank, Marshall was the justice of the Maryland state. Now I looked at my kingdom, I was finally there, and I sat on my throne as the Prince of Bel Air.
Before beginning Section 3, there are a few things we need to keep in mind. First, the less than essential question. How justifiable was U.S. expansion in the 1800s? So when we go over how the United States acquired Florida, keep the thought of how justifiable was the way we were acquiring them in mind. Also, the section essential question, what was one reason the United States wanted to acquire Florida? Remember, write down the section essential question on your section essential question handout. Also, remember, when you hear the answer, to write down the correct answer. Another thing we need to keep in mind is the vocabulary for the section. The only word we need to know for Section 3 would be diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of conducting negotiations with other countries. So if one country is working on something with another country, they're negotiating. They're working back and forth. That's diplomacy. So when the United States is working with Great Britain, or is working with France, or is working with China, it's diplomacy between the two nations. It's them working together. The United States acquires Florida. Having acquired Louisiana through diplomacy, which remember is working with other nations, working together, President Jefferson turned next to Florida. Spain had colonized Florida in the late 1500s. By the 1800s, Florida had a diverse population of Seminole Indians, Spanish colonists, English traders, and runaway slaves. In 1804, Jefferson sent 2 diplomats to Spain to buy Florida. Spain's answer was no deal. Many Americans in the Southeast wanted the United States to take over Florida. Slave owners in Georgia were angry because slaves sometimes ran away to Florida. The Seminole Indians welcomed some of the escaped slaves. In addition, the landowners in Georgia were also upset by the Seminole raids onto their land. Over the next few years, Spain's control of Florida weakened. The Spanish government could do nothing to stop the raids on farms in Georgia by Seminoles and ex-slaves. Andrew Jackson invades Florida. In 1818, President James Monroe sent Andrew Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, to Georgia with orders to end the raids. Jackson was told that he could chase raiding Seminoles into Florida, but he did not have the authority to invade the Spanish colony. Because remember, the country of Spain still owned Florida. Despite his orders, Jackson marched into Florida with a force of 1,700 troops. Over the next few weeks, he captured Spanish military posts and arrested, tried, and executed 2 British subjects for stirring up Indian attacks. He also replaced the Spanish governor with an American. Spain demanded that Jackson be called back to Washington and punished for his illegal invasion. Fearing war, President Monroe asked his cabinet for advice. Remember, the cabinet are the people that surround the president that advise him. All but one of his cabinet members advised him to remove Jackson and apologize to Spain. The exception was Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. Rather than apologize, Adams convinced Monroe to send a message to Spain. The message was this: govern Florida properly or get out. Equally fearful of war, Spain decided to get out. In 1819, the Spanish government agreed to yield Florida to the United States. In exchange, the United States agreed to pay off $5 million in settlers' claims against Spain. The United States also agreed to honor Spain's longtime claim to Texas. Not all Americans were happy about leaving Spain in charge of Texas. One newspaper declared Texas was worth 10 Floridas. Even so, the Senate ratified the Florida Treaty 2 days after it was signed. Alright, so that covers the section on Florida and how the United States acquired Florida. So let's look back on the section essential question. What was one reason the United States wanted to acquire Florida? Well, there were a couple different reasons to acquire Florida, but the reason we want to focus on was they wanted to end the raids into Georgia. Remember, the farmers in Georgia were upset because the Seminole Indians kept coming up from Florida and raiding their land. So, one of the reasons the United States wanted to acquire Florida was to put a stop to or end these raids. Alright, now that we've covered the information for Section 3, you need to make sure that you've completed your interactive notebook, you've answered the one section essential question, wrote down the question and the answer on your section essential question handout, and you've also went back and looked at the scale for Section 3. Read over the scales and place today's date on where you are. Hopefully you're a 3 by now. If not, you might want to either go back and read the text or listen to the video again.